What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Nelson Fragrance. My name is Ryan. Thank you for being here. So today we're going to be going back and taking a deep dive into a fragrance that's been shown off a couple times already. We did a unboxing of FolkWinds perfumes for my very first video. And then I also featured this fragrance in my my fall picks. And this is going to be American Pharoah from FolkWinds Perfumes. So this is probably turning out to be what is probably the biggest surprise for me out of his debut release. I knew I was going to love Cloud Illusions, but with American Pharoah, I'm not the biggest fan of tobacco, especially when it's a dominant note in fragrances. But with this one, I find that it's a tobacco that works well for me. It's not too offensive to my nose. I find that I really like it, and especially with everything else going on in this perfume. So we're going to get a nice, good look at the bottle here. So this is American Pharoah. Nice machined steel cap with the logo on top of the cap. Nice and heavy. And it does fit snugly on the bottle. So you can kind of lift it by the cap a little bit. Juice. And there is a bit of stuff floating around inside. You can see this is a Parfum concentration. I believe it's around 30%, but I'm not exactly sure. So with American Pharoah, I've been wearing this a lot lately, and it works really, really well in the cold weather. And that's not to say that it can't be worn in warm weather, but it just works much better in cooler weather, especially for my taste, because I like things to be a little warmer. Like that's when I tend to bring out like a little bit of like the smokier fragrances, the heavier fragrances, the sweet ones, what have you. So with this fragrance, when you first spray it on, the first two things you get out of this is the cherry and the tobacco. And it's not a cherry tobacco. You actually get two distinct separate notes here. There's a cherry, like a cherry wine accord, I believe, or a cherry wine absolute, and then the tobacco as well. And they come off as two separate entities in this perfume. And the cherry is fantastic. The tobacco, it's leafy. It's not smoky or screechy or anything to me. It's a nice, leafy, pleasant tobacco. I find it quite wearable. and there's musk, there's ambergris. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But right off the opening, that's the biggest two things I get. And that lasts for a good 15-20 minutes. And then as the perfume dries down is when the real magic of the perfume happens for me, because that's when the cedar comes out. So on my skin, once we move into the mid, I get this enormous cedar note that creeps out and pretty much pushes forward past that cherry and tobacco. And it just takes over the perfume for me, and it lasts that way for several hours. But I'm a really, really big fan of cedar. It takes me a lot back to my childhood, because I spent a lot of the time in my woods and in my grandfather's wood shop as a child. So it just takes me back, just reminds me of days that I spent in the woods around my grandfather's place, in the mountains in Appalachia. So that this tends to be like a bit more of a sentimental fragrance for me when that cedar comes out, and it just hits me, and I just absolutely love it. And there's also things in here like vanilla and rose. Those don't come off too loud on my skin. They're not really detectable as individual notes. They're there more in the feel of the fragrance, at least for me, than like present parts of the fragrance. So then moving into the base, the musk comes out a lot more. The ambergris is present. And the cherry and the tobacco, they're there for pretty much the entire life of the fragrance. It gets a little bit perfumey for me in the dry down. But all in all, this is just an incredible, incredible perfume. And it's a bit of a shapeshifter. And if you're unfamiliar of what the term shapeshifter brings when it comes to perfumes, it means that it can be different from wearing to wearing. So even though you're putting on the same perfume, you can even apply it to the same spot, and then one day you can get certain notes, and then like other days it'll present in a different way, shape-shifting, if you will. And I do find this to be a bit of a shapeshifter on my skin. It's very, very non-linear. So each wearing, from what you spray on to what you get in the far dry down, it's very, very different. It's a whole wearing experience, a journey from beginning to end, from opening to heart to base. And each wearing on its own can be, it just brings different facets of that fragrance to me. So it's a very, very enjoyable fragrance to wear multiple times because you're just finding different nuances of the fragrance between different wearings. So, and then as for the performance of the fragrance, this is probably the thickest and heaviest of the three from FolkWinds, of the debut trio that I've tried. So that I get exceptional performance with this. It projects very well. It has an above average sillage. So the sillage isn't super thick, but it is thicker than the other two FolkWinds perfumes. And the longevity is exceptional. It pretty much lasts from the time I spray it on to the time that I wash it off, sometimes 20, 24 plus hours. It's usually around the 12 to 16 hour mark is when it stops projecting and becomes more of a skin scent. Still detectable a couple of inches off skin, but it's definitely present until you wash it off. So that is American Pharoah by FolkWinds Perfumes. A little bit more of a deep dive. Thank you for joining me. Peace and love, everyone.